This brings us to the final chapter, Chapter 7, the Second American Enlightenment. America's history cannot be understood apart from a simple reality. America started life and then flourished during her first century and a half as a uniquely designed republic in which men, ruled by reason, were largely free to go where their vision took them. Today's reality is something different. America, early now in the 21st century, is largely taken by an age of unreason in which the rule is coercion. Prior chapters examined each reality. Chapter 1, Prometheus in America, dealt with the role of reason in the founding of the new Enlightenment nation. Chapter 2, Reason Unbound, examined the role of reason in her titanic growth. Chapter 3, Zeus in America, explained why, despite her reason-based start, supernatural forces were able to reassert themselves so successfully in America. Chapter 4, The Post-Enlightenment Mindset, dissected the age-old anti-reason view of human nature that reasserted itself with the fading of the Enlightenment. Chapter 5, Chains, The Wrath of Zeus, made clear how Zeus's two modern reincarnations, regulatory government and Christian God, chain human reason. Chapter 6, Heracles, featured Ayn Rand, the 20th century philosopher-novelist who cut through those chains and unleashed reason on Earth once again. This seventh and final chapter will project what is now possible, a second American Enlightenment or Second Age of Reason. Together with Chapter 6, it makes good the promise in the subtitle of this book, namely, The Rise, Demise, and Recovery of America's Original Spirit. The banning of initiated coercion. Intellectual history is overwhelmingly dominated by ages of unreason, punctuated with relatively brief periods of reason like exclamation points. When reason predominates, man is free to think, to define his own destiny, and to criticize and defy tyrannical authority. The vastly longer periods of unreason stand in stark contrast. In them, tyrannical authority disarms man by negating his rational faculty. Then it readily brings about compliance to its dictates. And as discussed earlier, much of that compliance eventually becomes willing compliance. Today's America is largely consumed by such an age. Once again, she is consumed by an age of unreason. So prevalent has coercion or the threat of it become, and so often veiled under a patina of civility, that many Americans today fail to appreciate how coerced they are. Many others accept that coercion in willing compliance. As a result, Americans generally have scant motivation for imagining a social system in which force has been banned. That is, they have scant motivation for imagining a social system in which reason, the faculty that functions on observation, logic, and persuasion, has supplanted force as the culture's main driver. This final chapter sets the imagination loose. In the coming pages, we enter a future America. We enter the age of America's Second Enlightenment. Sit back and simply enjoy the excursion. Bear in mind that most of what follows once existed in an earlier America. This is the world of America's Second Age of Reason. It is now in full bloom. As we enter this world, the most visible and dramatic change in day-to-day existence is a social system in which government oversight does not exist. As we scan America's economy, gone are the innumerable coercive government regulations, and gone the multitude of alphabet agencies that administered them. Gone is the Federal Reserve, the apparatus by which the government historically controlled the nation's financial system in its entirety. The behavior police, looking to, quote, enforce strong regulations embodying norms of good behavior, Chapter 5, were out of work long ago. Individual judgment now rules, provided no one's rights are violated or threatened by force. People are free to make mistakes, to victimize themselves, to misbehave. It is now recognized that higher authority, whether God or government, has no business trying to force good behavior. Rational persuasion has replaced physical force or the threat of it. Society is profoundly at peace. The authority of reason is the only authority. Those who choose to follow paths of weakness and depravity, paths of unreason, do not fare well. The system of the past is now gone. That system not only permitted those paths to exist, but it positively paved them with gold. To be sure, there exist those who exhibit human weakness and depravity. Individuals are free to develop such tendencies. Under any system, they have that choice and should have that choice. Again, short of violating or threatening to violate the rights of others. But now such people, if their chosen path is to live off the back of others, find themselves living in a social system unsympathetic to that path. Entitlement programs have been phased out, or if their chosen path is somehow to violate the rights of others, they find themselves faced with a legal system implacable in its defense of individual rights. The resultant changes have been sweeping. Swept away is the ability of the politician to create vast fiscal constituencies, the entitlement holder classes. Swept away is the ability of the bureaucrat to initiate and spawn crony relationships with business. Swept away are the government's perennial attempts to stimulate the economy. Special treatment, favoritism, and corporate welfare are gone along with the evils they spawn. Conversely, swept away is the ability of those in the private sector, banker, industrialist, scientist, educator, to seek a crony relationship with a government regulatory or funding agency. All this is preempted now that the public sector, the government, is constitutionally prohibited from intervening in the private sector. No longer can the public sector subsidize, license, franchise any part of the private sector. Throughout history, the greatest specimens of human depravity have not been criminals. Rather, they have been found in positions of authority. They have been kings, they have been emperors, they have been dictators, they have been popes. Above all, they have been governments that, in the absence of constitutional prohibitions to the contrary, had the power to initiate coercive force against their citizens. Even in democracies, the term government service was a misnomer. It actually meant power over the individual citizen. It was an open invitation for the corrupt bureaucrat to choose weakness and depravity. It was also an open invitation for power seekers to pursue government employment in the first place. With rare exceptions, such evils were rife in all civilizations throughout history. All such depravity is now swept away in America. America, in her second Enlightenment, is the first country ever to have so completely done so by constitutionally limiting government to the sole function of protecting individual rights. Swept away is the endemic pressure group warfare throughout the economy, both private and public, each group looking to employ government force against its enemies, that is, other pressure groups. Such a corrosive phenomenon is now in the distant past. The government has been stripped of the economic power, that is, the purse strings, that invited pressure groups and made them inevitable. Weakness and depravity, whether in the private sector or public, are no longer viable options. It has nothing to do with whether humans are naturally good or evil. As volitional beings, they can choose to become either. Rather, it is the existence of a system that prohibits anyone, anywhere, from initiating force against other humans. It is a system intransigently, punishingly opposed to any attempts to do so. Now, in America's second age of reason, reason completely rules in place of coercion. Government is limited solely to the protection of individual rights and voluntary coercion-free trade. With government out of the private sector, the pervasive and corrupting influence of government force initiated against private citizens, Chapter 5, is no more. No longer can economic power become political power or political power become economic power. Those powers can no longer be bought and sold. The corrupt phenomenon of cronyism is no longer possible. The government's political power is constitutionally limited solely to the protection of individual rights. That is, it is limited to the exercise of retaliatory force against anyone who would initiate force against others. Government has no other power. A business's economic power can legitimately grow as large as that business is able to grow it, providing it does not violate the rights of others. But never can a business use its economic power to purchase political power. There no longer exists that kind of political power to be purchased. The shelves are empty. Thus, a business, now in this coercion-free environment, cannot use government to force others to trade with it, while excluding competition. As history gives witness, such coercive monopolies were only possible when government was allowed to intervene in the economy. There is another side to the coin, namely, the positives realized by eliminating the above evils. These include spectacular prosperity, unimaginable advances in every sector of the economy, and nearly full employment as a steady state. Some unemployment always exists in a dynamic economy, as inefficient or outmoded enterprises meet their demise. But now unemployment is temporary, while failed companies retool or turn to other ventures. It is a world made for venture capitalists. Innovation has never been more rampant. All this barely scratches the surface. It does not touch on the Mars colony, or the development of long-term remission techniques for all cancers, or the pristine nature of the environment or the longer and healthier lifespans. All these advances have been accelerated by the massive shift of wealth from the public sector back to the private sector, where it was produced in the first place. Government is now 1/10 the size it was during its heyday in earlier centuries. Funding this government strictly through voluntary means has become one of the greatest areas of creativity and innovation. The age-old tax system of wealth expropriation and redistribution has been replaced. The vast regulatory state is no more. Entitlement programs are gone. The flow of wealth back to the private sector truly has been astronomical. Again, all this barely scratches the surface. Now let us consider the intangibles. There has been a widespread return of the virtue of individual responsibility. This was a virtue that predominated during America's first Enlightenment. At the same time, magnanimous goodwill has become widely evident. As entitlement programs were phased out, an American population that had become so dependent on them was transformed. Mean-spiritedness, as a result of being dependent, and mean-spiritedness, as a result of being forced to finance the dependent, have both been supplanted. It came as a great surprise to many Americans, but the genuinely needy have never been better cared for, despite the fact that people are no longer forced to help them. Rather, the help comes quite naturally. Volunteerism, always a great phenomenon in America, has skyrocketed. People have more leisure, earlier retirements, shorter workdays, longer vacations. We have seen a proliferation of third-party administrators, TPAs, promoting and managing volunteer endeavors. These are themselves largely staffed by volunteers. Such TPAs have always existed in America, but now the scale is unprecedented. Of course, a negative note remains. There are those who perversely seek to live a life of dependence, living off of others, barely lifting a hand to help themselves. Even these, however, find benefactors willing to help. There are always those who are convinced not only that self-sacrifice is the greatest virtue, but that such virtue is even greater the more undeserving the recipients. Such, quote, benefactors are always free to live their lives of self-sacrifice. Further results. Now in America's second age of reason, belief in the innate weakness and depravity of human nature, tenet 1 of the post-Enlightenment mindset, is dramatically reduced. There has been a pronounced return of social grace, self-respect, and self-confidence. Optimism and goodwill predominate, along with a search for excellence in all things. Christianity's doctrine of original sin has become the minority view. The view that humans are inherently weak and depraved is now commonly regarded as itself depraved. It is seen as unworthy of humans. This dramatic about-face in man's view of human nature is not hard to understand. First, widespread depravity was eliminated with the elimination of the evils cited above. Historically, those evils, to religious and secular authority figures, were taken as evidence of the inherent weakness and depravity of human nature. That evidence no longer exists. The system that enabled humans to choose and profit from weakness and depravity is now gone. Second, Christianity's unreason, discussed at length in Chapter 5, no longer plays so dominant a role in America. Religion has fallen out of favor during America's Second Enlightenment. As in America's First Enlightenment, enlightenment means to be enlightened by reason. Of course, Christian unreason still exists. Freedom of conscience is always a basic right. People are free to believe what they wish to believe. But incursions of religion into politics have now been stopped. Now, religion really is strictly a matter of private conscience. No longer are major party platforms vehicles for the agendas of the religious right or left. The government no longer has the power to advance those agendas. Church-state separation truly is complete. Throughout the 21st century and for much of the 22nd, it was common for libertarian groups to believe that government is inherently depraved. To various degrees, they held that government unavoidably initiates coercion against the citizens of a country. This thinking extrapolated the inherent depravity of man doctrine to an inherent depravity of government doctrine. Now, in America's Second Enlightenment, however, belief in this doctrine, like that of original sin, has been dramatically reduced. America's new government is properly limited by what is essentially a new constitution. This constitution explicitly articulates the separations needed to prevent the government from initiating force against any American citizen. All areas of the private sector are now no-fly zones for government. These are the economy, finance, education, medicine, science, and religion. There are still those who hold to the inherent depravity of government doctrine and the inevitable anarchy it leads to. But proponents of this doctrine, now in America's second age of reason, have been marginalized. The vital role of government. One might conclude from the above paragraphs that government's importance in Second Enlightenment America has been undercut, but actually just the opposite has been the case. Yes, for the first time, government is explicitly, consistently limited to the protection of individual rights, but respect for government has never been higher. Now the prevailing view is that few things are more vital than serving in the defense of individual rights. There is a great awareness that in the complex culture of an advanced society within a global economy, the defending of individual rights is a daunting task. The challenges of protecting individual rights are unrelenting and complex. The government, of necessity, has needed to be active, strong, and decisive. America's foreign policy, now in her second enlightenment, stands as a model to the world. America leads by example, and she leads by her powerful defense system. She leads by her unhesitating articulation that the moral stature of a social system is a function of how free it is. She leads by her articulation that the more a country is based on unreason, coercion, and contempt for rights, the more evil it is. Multiculturalism, the view that all cultures are somehow of equal moral stature, has been recognized as itself devoid of moral stature. In America's Second Enlightenment, she has again become pro-immigration. The hostility to immigration that was so common in the late 20th century and throughout the 21st is now gone. During that dismal period, American law had largely and tragically prohibited immigration. Now, however, that has changed. America is once again a nation of open immigration. Open immigration is now seen as not only politically right, but morally right. Traditional arguments against it have been thoroughly discredited. To maintain the concept of rights during America's Second Enlightenment, the government has constantly had to reassert two vital aspects of the concept rights. First, a right is a right to take action. It is not a right to a product or service. As pointed out by Ayn Rand last chapter, the latter is a recipe for coercion, the coercion of those who must be forced to provide that product or service. Second, only individuals possess rights. That is, federal and state and local governments do not possess rights, nor does any other group, public or private. This bears repeating. Only individuals possess rights. Each sector of government, the police, the court system, the three political branches, the military, involves work that is critical to the well-being of a society founded on individual rights. Thus, government employment is not only greatly attractive to motivated men and women of ability, for whom individual rights are supreme values, it is also honorable. As always, government employees swear an oath of office to defend and uphold the Constitution of the United States. But now this oath, instead of ending with "So help me God," ends with the same two words that ended the 1776 Declaration of Independence. New inductees into government now, quote, mutually pledge in spiritual union with all who preceded them their, quote, sacred honor. Never before has the role of government been made sacred. Never before has government been more vital and honorable than it is now in America's Second Enlightenment, her second age of reason. America today, the battle for the human mind. Lengthy transitions will be needed as America evolves to her Second Enlightenment. The above scenario captures only a few elements, yet even for those few, enormous complexities have to be confronted and resolved. The reversal of a coercive system that has become all but omnipotent needs time. The self-perpetuating nature of chains, both secular and religious, has to be addressed. Fiscal constituencies, widespread cronyism, and ubiquitous pressure group warfare stand as dead weights against change. To accomplish a reversal, America needs to wrest back an entire country from the forces of unreason. That will require time and effort. Above all, it will require the recognition that all forces of unreason originate from a political system under which a government has the power to initiate force against its citizens. That is, it will require the realization that government coercion is the root of all social evils, as outlined above. America is a product of revolution. She came into being with a Revolutionary War, driven by an intellectual revolution, the likes of which had never been seen before. There was a peaceful industrial revolution that followed. There is her ongoing technological revolution. The potential to improve man's lot in medicine, in education, in living standard has never been greater than it is now in the 21st century. Truly, we live in an extraordinary and exciting time. But marvelous as this revolution is, it cannot stop, let alone repel, the presence in America of the age-old forces of unreason and coercion. Indeed, today's forces of unreason are themselves skilled exploiters of technology. The battle for the human mind, by its nature, always needs to be prosecuted at the intellectual level. That battle is well underway. That battle is America's second intellectual revolution, and as we saw last chapter, it was inaugurated in the latter decades of the 20th century by Ayn Rand and her pro-reason philosophy of objectivism. For the philosophy of objectivism, there are three primary sources. First, there is the Ayn Rand Institute, ARI, founded in 1985, the conduit to all things objectivist. Second, there is the book Objectivism, The Philosophy of Ayn Rand, 1991 by Leonard Peikoff. It's the definitive text of what Ayn Rand said. Third, there is the Ayn Rand Lexicon, a free lookup guide available at AynRandLexicon.com, edited by Harry Binswanger. For Objectivism Applied, there is Leonard Peikoff's 1988 address, Why Should One Act on Principle? This foundational essay is available on the Ayn Rand Institute e-store. It's also available in print in the 2011 book, Why Businessmen Need Philosophy. For applied objectivism, there is a book, Free Market Revolution, by Yaron Brook and Don Watkins, ARI Associate and Executive Director, 2012. For objectivism applied, there is George Reisman's masterwork in economics, Capitalism, A Treatise on Economics, 1998. For objectivism applied, there is the quarterly journal, The Objective Standard, daily blog posts searchable on a wide array of topics, journal articles available as PDF downloads. For objectivism applied, there are the 20 top objectivist blogs. Simply Google to that subject, 20 top objectivist blogs. 3 battlefields for the human mind. The battle for the human mind is a battle for reason. It is a philosophic battle. In prosecuting it, 3 theaters are among the most vital: education, religion, and history. First, regarding education. Throughout history, dictators have recognized that to control a population, you must shape the mind of the population. The population must be rendered compliant. You do not want people thinking for themselves. These are the people who defy authority. As C. Bradley Thompson demonstrates, compliant citizenry has always been an explicit goal of America's government education system. Its architects make that clear. Thompson's essays are fundamental to understanding the role of education in the battle for the human mind. Start by simply Googling to Thompson's essay, Education in a Free Society, originally published in the Objective Standard in the winter 2013 issue. Second, regarding religion. Freedom of religion is a basic right, and America is the first nation to prohibit a state religion in its Constitution. Many good people, religious people, champion liberty, but unfortunately do so by appeal to God and the supernatural. Without realizing it, they therefore stand philosophically opposed to liberty. Leonard Peikoff explains in an address titled Religion versus America. This address is fundamental to grasping the adverse role of religion in the battle for the human mind. Text of this address is available without cost by searching on Leonard Peikoff, Religion versus America, on the Ayn Rand Institute user page. Finally, regarding history. A return to a culture of reason will necessarily entail a return to respect for history. This includes not only a respect for American history generally, but the history of capitalism specifically. It also needs to include the place of Ayn Rand in the history of philosophy. Today, she continues to be vilified and distorted, as she was during her life, usually by those relying on commentary and interpretation by her avowed enemies. These later generation detractors continue to ignore readily available sources and quite deliberately perpetuate error and distortion. Regarding the history of capitalism, see Ayn Rand, Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal, 1967 essay collection, largely historical. See especially Notes on the History of American Free Enterprise discussed in Chapter 6, above, and the lead essay, What is Capitalism? The Power of Reason. History provides overwhelming evidence of the power of reason and thought to advance human life. Throughout history, reason has lavishly rewarded those cultures in which it was a preeminent feature: the Golden Age of Greece, the Renaissance, the European and American Enlightenments. In such periods, reason brought man relative peace, prosperity, intellectual and artistic development, and advances in science. The Arab world, too, had its golden age, from roughly the 8th to the 12th centuries. As scholar Andrew Bernstein recounts, during this era, the Arab rediscovery of Greek thought led to towering achievement in medicine, literature, mathematics, and astronomy. Tragically, for reason Bernstein makes clear, the Islamic world ultimately rejected reason, after which it, quote, collapsed into a cultural dark age where it remains, end quote. Indeed, throughout history, every culture driven by unreason has been implacably punished by the coercion to which it inevitably leads. Recall the theocratic dictatorship of Europe's medieval era and the fascist and Nazi dictatorships during the 20th century. Force ruled, mankind suffered unspeakably. Consider the history being written today. Note the socialist and fascist dictatorships in Africa. Observe the theocratic dictatorships of the Middle East. Recall the satellite photos of the Korean Peninsula at night, lit by the torch of Prometheus in the south, but blanketed by darkness in the north, with the exception of its capital city, Pyongyang. Observe the vast areas of the globe that do not know the light of reason, or modernity. As always, in the absence of reason, and of what reason makes possible, human life languishes, again unspeakably. History's record is inescapable. Reason and thought have been the drivers of all human achievement, progress, and flourishing. Aeschylus's Prometheus pointed this out nearly 3 millennia ago. Ayn Rand declared it in the 20th century and further validated reason against all who would subvert it. America's founding documents attest to the power of reason in the creation of a new nation on a virgin continent. With their reason-based formulation, their rights-advancing content, their passionate and decisive phrasing, these documents remain revered by most Americans to this day. It is no coincidence that the Freedom Tower at One World Trade Center, New York City, replacing the Twin Towers lost on September 11, 2001, stands 1,776 feet tall, in symbolic tribute to the date of America's Declaration of Independence. America's founding documents remain unique and unprecedented. Most Americans, rightly, remain proud of them, despite the wave of multiculturalism swamping the world. As such, they remain foundational in the infrastructure needed for the coming Second American Enlightenment. Is it reasonable to expect that reason will return to America as a preeminent force? If reality is on the side of reason, that is, if reason works in reality, as world history and American history demonstrate so vividly, then the answer should be yes. Let's consider reason in the individual. Most citizens of the United States of America revere reason, the faculty of observation, logic, and persuasion. They exhibit a natural emotional defiance when anyone, abandoning reason, tries to push them around. They exhibit a healthy contempt for that type of self-serving civil servant whose mission in life seems to be to do just that. The Second American Enlightenment will see this emotional defiance mature into an intellectual, reason-based defiance. The very way most Americans carry themselves, the way their bodies move as they go about their daily lives, is cause for optimism. There is the happy confidence of so many of the young, not yet appreciating the power of their minds, not yet fully lit with the power of reason, for the Second Enlightenment is still to come. But again, because they live in America, the basic foundation exists for that to happen eventually. Then there are reason-based catalysts that will accelerate the journey to America's second age of reason. Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism is, of course, the greatest catalyst, and many other catalysts now exist to advance and accelerate the intellectual revolution she initiated. Catalysts are ongoing and can take a number of forms. There are the books to be written and organizations to be formed that will join those already in existence. Together, they will relentlessly promote and accelerate the life-advancing record of individual rights, free enterprise, and liberty. As economist George Reisman puts it, there will, of necessity, be the creation of a capitalist party, formally organized and serving primarily as an educational institution. It will have book publishing houses and theoretical journals. It will have magazines on current issues and, quote, schools turning out intellectual leaders thoroughly versed in economic theory and political philosophy, end quote. There will likely be an organization focused exclusively on epistemology, perhaps calling itself the Epistemology Society. This would be a group of intellectuals who take on the mission of guarding against and countering bad epistemology. They would directly confront junk science, ignorance of logical fallacies, and widespread manipulation of statistics in order to make falsehoods plausible. The society will make epistemology exciting and respectable. Epistemology, the branch of philosophy that studies the nature, origin, means, extent, and certainty of human knowledge, for the first time will enter mainstream American culture. People will naturally experience delight in using their minds in this new way. There will likely be an organization focusing on constitutional law, perhaps calling itself the James Madison Constitution Society, in honor of America's great founding father. Its long-term mission would be to undo and then reverse the calamitous corruption of America's original Constitution, which started, as we noted earlier, before the ink was even dry. They will be the men and women of towering accomplishment, idealism, and integrity, fully committed to the pro-reason philosophy of Ayn Rand and willing to serve in public office. They will be the likely individuals in the mold just described who become President of the United States. Then there are financial catalysts. There will no doubt be the influx of billion-dollar contributions on a regular basis into the pro-reason organizations already formed and yet to be formed. The premise underlying all that I have just said, indeed of this entire book, is this: reason is invincible. Reason is self-reinforcing. It is on the side of what is right. It works in reality always. Philosopher Andrew Bernstein captures it with, quote, "The human capacity to reason and the yearning for freedom and prosperity will survive as long as humanity itself. No degree of irrational philosophy or repressive government will suffice to stamp these out." Sacred honor. America's original spirit was an intellectual defiance of the twin tyrannies of Christian God and coercive government. An unstoppable force, its expression took a number of forms. In the age-old conflict between reason and coercion, it championed reason. In the perennial conflict between the individual and the collective, it upheld the individual. In the irreconcilable defiance-compliance dichotomy, it utterly shunned compliance. Today, reason-based defiance is shared by all those who work for America's second Enlightenment, America's second age of reason. For all these worthies, that spirit of defiance is once again the animating force. For all of them, the torch of Prometheus symbolizes not only intellectual defiance, but a raging fire in the belly. Truly they have recovered America's original spirit and the sacred honor that goes with it. There is, however, a vital difference. Today's intellectual revolutionaries seek to advance a philosophy, Ayn Rand's objectivism, that makes explicit certain key areas that were only implicit in America's original founding documents. Just as important, Rand's philosophy addresses the many vulnerabilities in the thinking of Enlightenment intellectuals. As we saw in Chapter 2, it was these shortfalls that led to the rapid demise of the Enlightenment in Europe and then America. Ayn Rand's philosophy, in addressing them, is thoroughly reason-based, grounded in human nature, that is, grounded in what man needs to survive and flourish. That is, it is objectively derived from observation and reasoning on the basis thereof. It is neither subjectively derived nor supernaturally based. It is the only philosophy that fully defies the tyrannies of unreason, both from government and from God, and can do so long term. It means man rehumanized. During the 19th century, as the Enlightenment waned in America, an age-old mindset resurfaced and persists to this day. Its tenets regarding A, the alleged inherent weakness and depravity of human nature, and B, self-sacrifice as the only measure of success, basically dehumanize man. They strip men and women of the self-esteem needed to defy tyrannical authority and set them up instead for compliance. America's second Enlightenment, her second age of reason, will return humans to their rightful stature. No longer will man be viewed as unnatural, as an enemy of nature, as a marauder on the planet. No longer will man be viewed as inherently weak and depraved. No longer will humans be viewed as creatures to be sacrificed. Authorities will always exist who seek to force compliance on the individual. In other words, the conflict between defiance and compliance is perennial. Although that conflict will be much abated in the Second Enlightenment, intellectual defiance, that is, reason-based defiance, must be preserved. Eternal vigilance against the forces of coercion must be maintained. In America's Second Enlightenment, the natural world in general and human nature in particular will be returned to the stature they enjoyed during America's First Enlightenment. Human nature will be supremely valued, perhaps not by everyone, but surely by the movers and shakers in the culture, who will sweep up the majority of others. Ayn Rand's soaring view of human nature and its potential will prevail. Human nature will be recognized as an integration of body and mind, of the physical and the spiritual, and the material realm as a whole, in all its sensual glory, will be recognized as the greatest realm because it includes matter that is animated by consciousness, by reason, by thought, by values, by the spiritual. That is, because it includes human beings, human nature. On such a view of nature and of man, vital concepts historically expropriated by religion and monopolized through the ages will be snatched back. They will be brought back from an imaginary supernatural realm and returned to where they belong, namely to man in this earthly realm. These are such concepts as ecstasy, exaltation, reverence, worship, rapture, the spiritual, the holy, and the sacred. And so I bring to a close my book, this labor of love, the Prometheus Connection. Since his birth in ancient Greece, Prometheus has stood as the supreme icon of defiance. And together, Prometheus and Zeus bring to life and dramatize that great conflict in human history, defiance versus compliance. The mythical Prometheus endured diabolical punishment for thousands of years, yet he remained defiant. His final 3 words in Aeschylus's great drama ring down to us through the millennia: I am wronged. This is the Prometheus of the invincible spirit. This is the Prometheus who refuses to surrender, refuses to comply. This is the spirit of America's founders. And today, this is the invincible spirit of all who defiantly fight to break the chains of coercion in today's world. Again, pledging as they do so that greatest of pledges, their sacred honor.